If you will, turn with me tonight to, we're going to look at two different places. Turn with me to Luke 7. Look at verses 1 through 10. And then Matthew 8, verses 5 through 13. So just to make it easy, just turn to Luke 7, bookmark your place there, and also find Matthew 8 and bookmark somewhere there, because we'll be in both. So Luke 7 and Matthew 8. So as we know, as you're finding your place, just by way of introduction, storytelling is a pretty large part of our everyday communication. Telling stories to one another, right? About our life, about our family, jobs, whatever, hobbies, whatever it may be. We love to tell stories. Well, for some cultures, it's vitally important to tell stories. Maybe, for example, people groups that are largely oral language and don't have written languages. It's important to be able to tell stories and get your point, your purpose, your message across through storytelling. And when we tell stories, just specifically in our context, we craft our stories based upon who's listening, right? You're not going to tell the same story to one person as opposed to another if there is some kind of hindrance to that person's ability to get the purpose across. So based upon what the point of our story we want to get across is, based upon the audience that we're telling the story to, and based upon really the proper response that we want the person that we're telling the story to have, we're going to craft our story in a different way. Not that we change the story or lie about certain aspects of the story, but we do craft them in different ways. And the same was true for the biblical writers, the gospel writers here in particular. The audience, the purpose, the response they were wanting to invoke, and many other different factors played into how they recorded the gospels in the way that they did. And this is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. In fact, it was necessary in specific context to craft their storytelling in certain ways. Just for example, we talked last week about why Matthew, in particular, uses kingdom of heaven as opposed to kingdom of God. Right? Matthew is writing to a largely Jewish audience who, out of respect and reverence for the name God, would not want to speak out loud the term God. So Matthew says kingdom of heaven. So it's not that Matthew is lying about this and he's not wanting to use kingdom of God, but he crafts the way he says it in such a way that he will not offend his audience. The purpose remains largely the same. We have an example of this in our two passages tonight. Both Luke and Matthew record the account of Jesus' healing of the centurion's servant. But if you read both accounts, you're going to read some differences. You're going to run into some differences. Now, does this mean that we shouldn't trust these two accounts, or we should trust one as opposed to the other? By no means. Instead, we should ask why. Why is this different? Why is this emphasized as opposed to that? Or why is this recorded in this account and not this? I'm of the opinion that these questions aren't irrelevant and they're not problematic. Rather, there's a purpose to why they're recorded in the way that they are. And it's our job to figure out what that purpose is. So we're going to look briefly at both of these accounts tonight. We're going to notice certainly the differences, but we'll focus primarily on the purpose of why they are written in the way that they are. So as we look at Luke's account, we're going to look there first. What we're going to see is that primarily Luke's purpose is to look at the humility of the centurion. So the way he crafts his account is going to be based upon emphasizing the humility of the centurion. Whereas in Matthew's account, he is focused primarily not on humility, but on faith. Now, these two things are not opposed to one another. There's just a different emphasis. And as we consider prayer, as we've been doing on Wednesday nights and will be doing for the foreseeable future on Wednesday nights, we need to see that both of these characteristics, humility and faith, are important as we make our request made known to the Father. So let's look at both, and let's first look at Luke 7, 1 through 10. So Luke 7, verse 1 through 10. And we read here, and notice all the details here as we read. Notice the details. Now when he had ended all his sayings in the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying, that he was worthy for whom he should do this, for he loves our nation, and he has built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them. And when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou shouldest enter under my roof. Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say in a word, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, having under me soldiers. And I say unto one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my servant, Do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turned him about, and said unto the people that followed, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And they that were sent, returning to the house, found the servant whole that had been sick. So it's clear from this account that the centurion, this is the occasion, this is the reason we find this passage here. The centurion had a sick servant, and he needed healing. It's pretty simple, pretty clear. Matthew's going to tell us the same. We're going to look at Matthew in just a moment. He's going to tell us the same. But we see then that the centurion who had heard of Jesus, maybe stories of his healing power, the mighty works that he was doing, whatever it may be, we don't know the extent of what he knew about Jesus. But we know that he sends Jewish elders to Jesus to plead his case for him. He sends Jewish elders to Jesus and tells Jesus to tell Jesus that his servant is sick and that he needs healing. Now, this is unusual for a couple of reasons. Primarily, the centurion is a Gentile. He's not a part of the Jewish nation, and this was a rather difficult barrier for the Jews normally to overcome. Also, it's pretty astonishing that the Jews would have anything to do with the centurion and vice versa, because they were enemies. Not only were they different in the fact of Jew and Gentile, but they were also enemies. But in this case, we see that this particular Gentile loved the Jews and that he had helped them in the building of their synagogue. Also, I think it's important at this point that we begin to see in Luke the word of the Lord coming to the Gentiles. So it's moving away from this exclusivity to Israel and to the Jews, more openly towards the Gentiles. In fact, in both accounts, Jesus is going to be astonished by this Gentiles' faith as opposed to the disbelief of the Jews. And we'll see that in a little bit more in Matthew's account. But there's another reason that Luke records the sending of the Jewish intermediaries to the Lord. And this is Luke's purpose here in highlighting primarily his humility. So we see that he sent people for him, right? This centurion, he sends people ahead of him. He sends these Jewish intermediaries. In verse 3 and in verse 6 through 7, we're told why. Well, it's pretty interesting. When Jesus was close to the centurion's home, that he sends these intermediaries back out to stop Jesus. And what was his message? Why does he send people to stop Jesus from coming into his home? He says this, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy. I am not worthy that thou shouldest enter under my roof. Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but saying a word, and my servant shall be healed. So we see the purpose originally of sending intermediaries for him to plead his case. Now we see the same thing about why he sent them to tell them not to come into the house. Why? It's because primarily the centurion thought that he was not worthy that Jesus should come into his house. There's a lot of humility here in this Gentile. It reminds me, may you as well, of the tax collector in the story of the tax collector and the Pharisee that come into the temple to pray. This is what reminds me of. They both went into the temple to pray. There's a difference here. There's one, the religious Pharisee, and then on the other hand, we have this tax collecting sinner. And what does the Pharisee do? He goes before God and he thanks God primarily for what? That he's not like the sinner, right? He thank God that I'm not like this man. How many of anybody ever prayed that prayer? That's a pretty bold prayer to be praying. But he prayed, thank God that he wasn't like this lowly sinner. And then he holds up all his good works before God as if he's important and that he's done a lot for God. But then we see the tax collector, and what does he do? He doesn't even approach the altar. It says he stands afar off. He won't even lift his head up, which was a pretty normal occurrence in that day for prayer, to lift your eyes, lift your head. But he held his head low, and what does he say? He beats his chest, and he says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And what does Jesus say? Which one went home justified? Jesus says the tax collector went home justified, the sinner, the one who cried out for mercy. And he records this, and he says, for all those who will exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The centurion really had every right to exalt himself. He was in charge, right? He had authority over many, many men, but he recognized ultimately one's authority was greater than his, and that was of Jesus. So the humility in the centurion's request for Jesus to remain outside of his home is pretty obvious. There's humility in that by saying, I am not worthy. But what we see next is that the centurion's humility is really rooted and grounded. It's founded in his understanding of who Jesus is. So not just in his understanding of who he is, primarily his unworthiness for Jesus to come in, especially as a Gentile, but also his understanding of who Jesus is. He calls Jesus here Lord. Now, this could simply be like me calling someone sir. It could easily be just a simple sign of respect, but it's possible that Lord for the centurion meant a little bit more, especially as we read verse 8. The reason he doesn't want Jesus to come into his house is this. He says, I also am a man set under authority, having under me soldiers, and I say unto one, go, and he goes, to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. Matthew records these same words, but what we see here is that the centurion understands who Jesus is, that he also has authority. And this authority, specifically the authority that is given him by God, allows him to command certain things. So the centurion understands that as a captain of the Roman army, I can command certain individuals to go, but he also understands now that Jesus has that authority as well. Not simply to tell people where to go, but here we see that he understands that Jesus' authority is much greater than his, because he can simply say, through his word, be healed, which is something the centurion certainly cannot do. The centurion cannot look at his servant and say, be healed, or he would have already done it, right? But he understands that Jesus has that power. Jesus has that authority given him by God to just speak his creative word into this servant's life, and that he would be healed. So what we see after this, and we're going to get into in just a moment, that Jesus marveled at the man's faith, and the servant was healed. Now, not much attention was given to the man's faith here. We're going to leave that up to Matthew. But the main thing that we see in Luke, through the sending of the intermediaries, is the humility of the centurion. He understands rightly who Jesus is, and in light of that, his own utter unworthiness. But thank God that Jesus is gracious, right, and merciful. And he promises that those who humble themselves will ultimately be exalted. And then we can go over to Matthew, and we see this same account. Matthew 8, 5 through 13. Luke has emphasized for us the humility of Jesus. And now we see in Matthew 8, 5 through 13, we're going to see the faith of the centurion. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home, sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus said unto him, I will come and heal. Now this in the Greek may well have been a question. Will I come and heal this man? Well, the centurion answered, as you would from a question, and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou should come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this man, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. And here we get into the faith of the centurion. Matthew really expounds here, not on the humility, even though it's there, but on the faith. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, which means he was amazed. He was amazed and said to them that followed, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And he expounds on this, because Luke said this, right? But what's Matthew going to say? And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into utter darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said unto the centurion, Go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour. So, in Matthew, we certainly see some differences, right? In Matthew, the centurion doesn't send intermediaries. He actually, it says, goes himself. But in that day, we need to understand, as Leon Morris writes, what a man does through agents, he may be said to do himself. Therefore, even if he has sent intermediaries, it's not necessary for Matthew to record that, because what a man does through someone else, he is actually doing through himself. So it's perfectly acceptable for Matthew to just leave that out. That's not his primary focus. His primary focus is not on the humility of the centurion, but as we will see, his primary focus is on his faith. Like in Luke, Matthew asked Jesus to heal his servant, and to do so by simply speaking the word. An interesting point here, as we read it, some translate this here as a question. Jesus' words here as, shall I come and heal this man? Instead of the statement, I will come and heal. So what we see here is that this isn't really a request in verse 6. So Jesus implies really what the centurion wants. His question really is a probing question here. He's given, he knows that the centurion understands that it's unacceptable for a Jewish man to enter into a Gentile house, a Gentile home. And through this question, we see the faith of the centurion. So Jesus probes him with this question, am I going to come into your home as this Jewish man and are you a Gentile? And he's probing to see what the centurion will say. And what does the centurion say? Only say the word. Only say the word. You don't have to come into my home. Only say. It's not that Jesus wouldn't go into the home. We certainly know him to be a man that was not afraid to sit and recline with sinners. But what we see here is that the centurion understands who Jesus is. He has faith that if only Jesus says the word, his servant will be healed. And Jesus, we read, again, marvels when he hears this. He's amazed at this. And he turns to those around him and he says this, Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from the east and west the nations and recline at table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the utter darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus is speaking about the centurion's faith here, but not just his faith. He speaks concerning the idea of faith in general, and that faith is not restricted to Israel. Faith is not restricted to those just coming from the line of those like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Faith is available to everyone, to all nations. In fact, in this instant, the Gentiles' faith is greater, Jesus says, than any that I've seen in Israel. As R.T. France writes, the kingdom of heaven is not a Jewish preserve, but is open to Gentiles like this centurion. Thus, faith, not race, is the criterion for membership of God's kingdom. So we see that Jesus is speaking of faith, and he's turning this away from this idea that it is primarily for Jews, and showing us that faith is available for everyone, for people of all nations. So we see faith in general, and now he turns specifically for the centurion, and he says this: "Go, let it be done for you as you have" what? Believed. So we see the example. We see that lived out faith of the centurion, and the servant was healed, we see immediately. France concludes this, and he says the centurion's faith is thus highlighted faith as the one thing needful. It is a practical faith which expects and receives results. So Matthew's point here in highlighting certain aspects as opposed to another is to highlight primarily the centurion's faith, whereas Luke's primary importance was to show the centurion's humility. Now, we need to understand that highlighting one characteristic as opposed to another does not diminish either characteristic. Therefore, humility and faith are not incompatible with one another, but they're necessarily here bound together. It's only when we realize our inability to save will we then place our faith in a greater Savior. And the same is true for the centurion here. He knew that he was powerless to save. He was unworthy for Jesus to come into his house. But what does this do? It drives him to Jesus. It drives him to the one who had all power and authority to save. The same should be true for us. As we think about our prayer life, as we think about our daily walk with the Lord, our unworthiness, our inability ought not drive us to despair, but to faith in Christ. That humility to admit, no, I don't have it all together. That humility to admit, no, I'm powerless. I'm powerless to control my lost family member. I can't do it. I'm powerless over my job situation, whatever it may be. You know, obviously, the circumstances can change. But the humility of admitting, I don't have all power. I don't have all authority. I am unworthy. And then letting that drive you not to despair or inward, but to faith in Christ. So humility allows us to truly examine ourselves. So when we think about prayer, as we pray in just a few moments, humility allows you to truly examine yourselves. Not try to make yourselves look good. Right? Not try to make, like, what do they say, putting lipstick on a pig? That's what it's like for us to try to make ourselves look good. We can't do it. It's impossible. Humility allows us to admit that. And then that allows us to express faith in the one who is in control, the one who does deliver, the one who is mighty to save. So as we pray tonight, as we spend a few moments in that, I wonder if there's something in your life that you are holding back, something you're not willing to admit to God, even though He knows it to be true, something that you're not relinquishing control of. I don't know what it may be. Maybe you lack faith that the Father can actually do what you request. Maybe you feel too unworthy to bring your request to God. But the call tonight is simply tell it to the Father. Tell it to the Father. The centurion did it. He relinquished his own perceived control, and it drove him to the one who is in control. So I want to give us that opportunity tonight. You know your need. If you don't have a need, maybe pray for someone else. Pray for Mount Pleasant in general. Either way, tonight pray in a spirit of humility, in a spirit of faith, because both of these are necessary as we make our request known to the Father. So I'm going to let y'all spend a few moments in prayer like we normally do, and I'm going to come up and close this.